All right, Michael, here we go with physical movement, physical exercise, the very first of the cogwheels. Some of the scientists that we followed actually try to figure out, why do we move? And I always like to say we move to get more blood flow, even just a smidgen or a heartbeat per minute, more blood flow to the brain, which brings more fuel, oxygen, glucose to the brain. What's your ideas of why would we want to move for our brain's health?
For the brain health, well, I would take it even further back. I'm working on revisions to our book, so I'm diving deeper into some of this stuff. Excuse me. And I would say we move because that's what life is about. I mean, in a very primal sense, you know that something is a living being when it actually moves and takes action to go towards food, to go away from danger. Daniel Wolpert, the neuroscientist out of Great Britain, calls himself a movement chauvinist.
Yes, I remember.
He says essentially that when you think about it carefully, the only purpose of the brain is to create sort of flexible, complex movement. And you can sometimes think of things, if I'm just coming up with ideas, there's no movement involved. Of course there is, because your neurons are firing and going, but any form of communication, you have to move your lips. Anything where you're going out and changing the environment.
You send those signals to your arms and legs and accomplish things.
Yeah, we don't exist as disembodied brains, in spite of science fiction. We are embodied brains, and the brain cannot function without the body cannot function without the brain. So movement is core to who we are, and it's core to existence.
Okay, so we know we've got the roots, we have to move. Now let's talk about how movement is critical. It's an essential cogwheel, and if you don't move, then you're setting yourself up for failure. And by move, we've changed that from physical exercise only, and it's just a few years ago, to physical movement. And the reason is, working in fields of aging, of course, you've got people who physically cannot move like they used to.
Right.
But we've always thought that if you can get just that smidgen more blood flow to the brain on a regular basis, so if someone can stand up and sit down once per night while watching a commercial, if they just stand up a couple of times, they've lifted their body weight up, and that will physically get more blood flow to the brain. Not much, but just enough to maybe make a difference. If someone can't stand up safely, then they can at least move an arm or two, and technically, doing this, Michael, I just got more blood flow to my brain. And that's really, the model is to do something rather than nothing when it comes to moving.
Yeah, it goes back to our point about the cogwheels needing to be personalized. Everybody's brain and body are different, and some people who, if they've been sedentary for a long time, doing anything, doing even the most modest type of movement on a regular basis is going to improve them. If you're an Olympic athlete, then it's ramped up to some other
other level. And if you are somebody who's a runner and you're really exercising, doing that stand up at during a commercial, that would be like throwing a rock into a turbulent ocean. You won't even see it. But what if that pond is fairly stagnant and you have someone who really needs that little extra amount? That's where it really works. But let's go to the other end of the spectrum of people who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who are thinking differently. Why would I exercise for my brain? Let's go into what happened with learning and exercise in the Naperville study, the book John Rady wrote called Spark, that showed that something's released in your brain when you have a certain amount of exercise. So what were the findings there?
Yeah, very interesting. Write this down. Well, I don't know, write this down. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which gets, the easy way is just BDNF.
Right. Now those are brain-derived, meaning that you create them in your brain. And I call them faucets that are there, and they're not turned on unless you use them, but they're there, brain-derived. They are neurotrophic factors, and when your brain can derive them by doing something, we want to teach people what it is they need to do to get this BDNF. So what happened?
Yeah. Well, to start, physical exercise stimulates BDNF in the brain, and BDNF is important because it's a growth factor and it's a repair factor. When it gets into the brain, it actually has the effect of going in and repairing damaged neurons.
And not only repairing, but repairing them at a rate that increases. It's sort of like a fertilizer, and what did John Rady label it?
That's right, miracle grow for the brain.
Yeah, and what they found is that when they had students or older adults who actually exercised enough so that they triggered that chemical BDNF in the brain, that their brain's neurons grew dendrites faster. And especially with those students who participated in the study at Naperville, the improvement was global, that they had attendance rates went up, the difficulties with students went down, the scores on tests went up. That learning process can be tied to getting more blood flow and triggering chemicals like the brain-derived factors.
It's an interesting point that made me think of the globalness. It's interesting with physical exercise that the benefits to the brain are global. They benefit, physical exercise benefits the whole brain. And it's probably because it is the blood flow, and there are capillaries all over the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It is this diffuse permeation of, that's probably not the right word, but diffuse flow of BDNF. Different from mental exercise,
That's right.
and we'll point that. Mental exercise is very targeted. Whatever activity you do targets one particular part of the brain.
And when you said that it's diffuse, think of the neurochemical cascade that happens when you're exercising, your pipelines are opening up in your brain. You do that on a regular basis.
I mean, the blood, the capillaries, right.
The capillaries. The blood flow increases just by any type of movement would increase it, but especially walking at a good clip. And we're going to end this segment on physical movement by saying it is movement, but there's a book out by Gretchen Reynolds that we take the title and really embrace it, and that is The First 20 Minutes. And what Gretchen found in really looking at what's out there in the science, and she's the science writer for the New York Times in the physical fitness area.
Very good source.
And what Gretchen found was that it's the first 20 minutes, Michael, that you get most of your benefits. And the benefits of the first 20 minutes are a takeaway for business people and students who are always too busy to exercise. If you want to exercise for 21 minutes or an hour, fine, but it's the first 20 minutes that you get your bulk
Maximum
of your
benefit.
benefits.
Yeah.
Now, those first 20 minutes need to be continuous, that they aren't going to be 5 minutes here and there, but you don't need to say, I have to exercise for an hour. And the other is a takeaway that is a phrase that I'll always use, and that is, humans are born to stroll. So picture yourself walking the pace of a baby buggy, talking to me and friends were walking along for 20 solid minutes. That seems to be something that we can all embrace. And she bases that, and I base that on the fact that our ancestors, before cars, before wheels, they walked. They walked. They didn't run. They ran twice. They ran to get food, and they ran to keep from, keep from becoming food. But they did stroll, and we're going to say to everybody, stroll for 20 minutes, move, and I think that's the goal of keeping that first cogwheel, and that's the exercise cogwheel, pumping the blood to your brain.